In the blistering heart of the Arizona desert, under a sky so wide it seemed to swallow the world, a scream tore through the silence on an August evening in 2001. It was Soren Veyra, his voice raw with desperation, calling out for his fiancée, Lira Kael, as a sudden violent sandstorm swept across the Sonoran wilderness. They were young, just 27 and 25, on a weekend backpacking trip meant to be a celebration of their engagement. But in that moment, as the wind howled and visibility dropped to nothing, Lira vanished, her footsteps erased by the churning sand. Soren stumbled through the storm, his flashlight beam cutting uselessly into the swirling dust, shouting her name until his throat bled. By the time the storm passed, both Soren and Lira were gone, their gear scattered like bones across the desert floor. A lone park ranger, Maris Calder, heard that scream from a distant ridge, her heart pounding as she scanned the horizon. She didn't know then that a silent hiker, hidden in the shadows of a rocky outcrop, had seen everything, and said nothing. For 7 years, the desert kept its secrets, until a single, impossible clue, a tattered scarf caught in a creosote bush, cracked the case wide open. The cheap motel room in Tucson felt like a cage to Amara Kael, Lira's older sister, as she sat on the edge of a sagging bed, staring at a faded cactus painting on the wall. It was 8:47 p.m. on August 12, 2001, and the sun had long since burned out of the sky, leaving a bruised purple twilight over the Sonoran desert. Soren and Lira were supposed to meet Amara at the motel by 6 p.m., their usual post-hike ritual of cheap pizza and laughter. Soren, a wiry geologist with a knack for reading the desert like a map, and Lira, a painter whose vibrant energy matched her bright turquoise backpack, were meticulous planners. They'd hiked the Sonoran trails dozens of times, always packing extra water, a satellite phone, and a detailed route map. 15 minutes late was nothing. An hour was unusual. Nearly 3 hours, and Amara's practiced calm, a remnant of her years as an ER nurse, began to crack like dry desert clay. Soren could navigate by the stars if he had to, and Lira's stubborn optimism made her the last person to panic. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. At 9:15 p.m., Amara's trembling fingers dialed the number for the Saguaro National Park ranger station. Her voice was steady as she reported Soren Veyra, 27, and Lira Kael, 25, missing. Their dusty Jeep was still parked at the trailhead untouched. Their planned route was a 12-mile loop through a remote section of the park, known for its jagged canyons and merciless heat. The last contact was a text from Lira at 2:13 p.m., a photo of her and Soren grinning in front of a towering saguaro, her turquoise backpack vivid against the muted desert tones. "Sun's brutal, but we're golden. Love you, sis." Amara forwarded the photo to the ranger station, her chest tightening at the sight of Lira's wide smile. At the ranger station, Maris Calder, a 15-year veteran with sun-etched lines on her face, took the call. She'd seen her share of desert mishaps, dehydrated tourists, twisted ankles. But a couple like Soren and Lira, young, fit, and experienced, disappearing in a single afternoon was different. Maris had been patrolling a high ridge when she heard a man scream, faint but unmistakable, just as the sandstorm hit around 4:30 p.m. She'd tried to radio for backup, but the storm scrambled the signal. By the time she reached the trailhead, the desert was still, and the couple was gone. What haunted her was the fleeting glimpse of a figure, a hiker maybe, watching from a distant outcrop just before the storm swallowed the landscape. She couldn't be sure, but the memory gnawed at her. The search began before dawn the next day, August 13, 2001. Saguaro National Park's Incident Command Post buzzed with urgency as rangers, volunteers, and a helicopter team mobilized. The Sonoran Desert is a labyrinth of arroyos and rock formations, where heat shimmers distort distances and sound dies in the vastness. Search teams moved methodically, their boots crunching on sun-baked earth, scanning for any sign, a footprint, a dropped water bottle, a scrap of cloth. They found nothing. Soren and Lira had vanished as completely as a mirage. By day 3, the search expanded, pulling in canine units and thermal drones. The desert's cruelty was its indifference. Temperatures soared to 110 degree bars, and shade was a rare commodity. Maris, leading a ground team, kept returning to that scream in the shadow of the silent hiker. She interviewed other hikers on the trail that day, but no one reported seeing anything unusual. The couple's gear, Lira's turquoise backpack, Soren's black GPS device, should have been easy to spot, yet the desert yielded nothing. On day 5, a volunteer stumbled across a small pile of gear, a torn map and a cracked water bottle, both belonging to Soren. They were found half buried in a dry wash, 2 miles off their planned route. The discovery sparked a theory. The sandstorm had disoriented them, pushing them into a treacherous canyon. But Maris wasn't convinced. The gear was too neatly arranged, almost staged. And why was there no sign of Lira's backpack? The search stretched into weeks, but the desert's silence was absolute. Amara refused to leave Tucson, renting the same motel room, walking the trailheads herself, her nurse's precision now a desperate ritual. The public's interest waned, and whispers began online. Maybe Soren and Lira had staged their disappearance, a romantic escape from their lives. Amara rejected the idea outright. Soren's quiet devotion to Lira, Lira's fierce love for her art, they weren't the type to run. As months turned to years, the case grew cold, filed away in the ranger station's archives. Amara's hope never faded, but it became a heavy, private burden. Then, on July 19, 2008, a hiker named Gavrik Torm, a solitary drifter known to rangers for his elusive treks, found a tattered scarf snagged on a creosote bush. Its turquoise threads faded, but unmistakable. It was Lira's. The discovery was no accident. It was the clue that would unravel the truth, and it came from the one person who'd been there all along. If you're gripped by this mystery, hit that like button and subscribe to join us as we uncover what really happened to Soren and Lira. Let's dive deeper into the desert's secrets. The turquoise scarf, its edges frayed but still vibrant against the muted desert, was a silent scream in the vastness of Saguaro National Park. Gavrik Torm, the hiker who found it, wasn't your typical trailblazer. A wiry man in his late 40s, he was a ghost in the desert, known to rangers for slipping through the backcountry without permits, living off the land for weeks at a time. He'd handed the scarf to a ranger at the visitor center, his weathered hands trembling slightly, claiming he'd found it while exploring a remote canyon. His story was vague, too vague for Maris Calder, who'd been haunted by the memory of that shadowy figure on the ridge back in 2001. The scarf was bagged as evidence and sent to the Arizona Department of Public Safety's forensic lab in Phoenix, reigniting a case that had long been buried under 7 years of dust. At the lab, forensic scientist Dr. Celine Navarro, a specialist in trace evidence, took charge. Her workspace was a sterile maze of microscopes and chemical analyzers, a stark contrast to the wild desert outside. The scarf was meticulously photographed, its turquoise cotton fibers examined for clues. The first finding was immediate. Faint traces of human blood, degraded but detectable, stained the fabric. DNA testing was inconclusive due to the sample's age, but the blood type matched Lira's, AB negative, a rare marker. More intriguing was the sand embedded in the scarf's weave. Under a scanning electron microscope, Dr. Navarro identified microscopic grains of volcanic tuff, a rock type found only in a specific cluster of canyons in the park's western reaches, far from Soren and Lira's planned route. This wasn't a random find. The scarf had been carried to that creosote bush, and the volcanic tuff was a breadcrumb leading somewhere new. Maris Calder, now a senior ranger, felt the case snap back to life. The volcanic tuff pointed to a rugged, seldom visited area known as the Ember Canyons, a maze of eroded rock towers and dry washes where even experienced hikers rarely ventured. The 2001 search had barely touched this region. It was too far from the couple's intended path, too brutal for a couple with day hike gear. But the scarf changed everything. Maris assembled a small team of elite rangers and geologists armed with topographic maps and the forensic report. Their mission: trace the scarf's journey back to its source, The ember canyons were a furnace, the August sun baking the red rock until it shimmered. The team moved slowly, eyes scanning for anything out of place. A scrap of fabric, a disturbed stone. On the second day, a geologist named Taryn Voss spotted something glinting in a narrow slot canyon. It was a metal carabiner, rusted but intact, wedged between two boulders. It matched the brand Soren used, its surface scratched as if it had been scraped across rock. The discovery was electric, but it raised more questions. How had the scarf and carabiner ended up miles apart, both in places no hiker would casually reach? Maris's mind kept circling back to Gavrik Torm. His sudden appearance with the scarf felt too convenient, his story too thin. She pulled his file from the Ranger archives. Torm had been cited twice in the late 1990s for illegal camping and once for digging without a permit, suspected of scavenging Native American artifacts, a common illicit trade in Arizona's deserts. His knowledge of the backcountry was unmatched, but so was his ability to evade scrutiny. Maris requested a background check, learning Torm lived in a rundown trailer on the edge of Tucson, rarely seen in town. She drove to his address, finding a sun-bleached trailer surrounded by discarded gear. Torm answered the door, his eyes narrowing at the sight of her ranger uniform. "Found anything else out there?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Torm shrugged, muttering about the desert giving up its secret slowly. But his hands fidgeted, and Maris noticed a faint scar on his knuckles, shaped like a crescent moon, a detail she filed away. Back at the ranger station, the investigation took a new turn. A hydrologist consultant, Dr. Joran Holt, suggested the scarf might have been carried by a flash flood. The Sonoran desert was prone to sudden, violent deluges, especially in late summer. Weather records from August 2001 showed a massive monsoon storm hitting the park the night Soren and Lira vanished, dumping 6 inches of rain in hours. Holt's team ran computer models using the scarf's discovery site and the volcanic tuff as anchors. The simulations traced a probable flood path back to a single source, a high, narrow canyon in the Ember Canyons called Vulture's Gulch. It was a place of sheer cliffs and hidden alcoves, a natural trap for floodwaters, and for anyone caught in them. The team redirected their search to Vulture's Gulch, a grueling trek requiring ropes and climbing gear. The canyon was a labyrinth, its walls pockmarked with shallow caves. On the 4th day, a ranger named Kael found a small alcove, its entrance partially blocked by a fallen boulder. Inside, the air was cool and still, the floor littered with debris. There, half buried in silt, was Lira's turquoise backpack, its straps torn but recognizable. The sight sent a jolt through the team. The backpack held a cracked water bottle, a sketchbook with Lira's drawings, and a single chilling item, a pocket knife with dried blood on the blade. This wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. Maris's gut told her Gavrik Torm knew more than he was saying. If this mystery is pulling you in, smash that like button and subscribe to follow the unraveling of Soren and Lira's fate. Let's keep digging into what the desert's hiding. The discovery of Lira's turquoise backpack in Vulture's Gulch was like a match struck in the dark, illuminating a case that had lain dormant for 7 years. The pocket knife, its blade crusted with blood, turned the investigation from a search for answers into a hunt for truth. Maris Calder stood in the alcove, her flashlight beam tracing the backpack's torn straps, her mind racing. The Sonoran desert didn't just swallow people, it buried their stories in sand and silence. But this backpack, with its grim cargo, was speaking. The blood on the knife was too old for DNA, but its presence screamed foul play. And Gavrik Torm, the silent hiker who'd found the scarf, was now the investigation's shadow, lurking at its edges. Maris ordered the alcove sealed, and the backpack was airlifted to Dr. Celine Navarro's lab in Phoenix. The forensic team worked with surgical precision, dissecting the backpack's contents. Lira's sketchbook, its pages warped but intact, held delicate drawings of saguaros and desert blooms, a haunting reminder of her artist's eye. The water bottle was empty, its cap missing, But the knife, small with a wooden handle, was the focal point. Microscopic analysis revealed traces of bone dust in the blood, suggesting it had cut through something more than flesh. The implications were chilling. Someone had been injured, perhaps fatally, in that canyon. Meanwhile, Maris dug deeper into Gavrik Torm's past. His record showed a pattern: citations for trespassing, scavenging, and one cryptic note from a 1999 report. Subject observed near restricted archaeological site. Tools confiscated. Torm wasn't just a drifter. He was a scavenger, possibly trafficking in black market artifacts. Vulture's Gulch was known to contain ancient petroglyphs, a magnet for poachers. Could Soren and Lira have stumbled across Torm's illegal operation during their hike? Maris requested a warrant to search Torm's trailer, but she needed more than suspicion. She returned to the ranger station, pulling weather data from that August 2001 storm. Dr. Joran Holt, the hydrologist, refined his flood models, confirming the backpack likely originated higher in Vulture's Gulch, where a natural rock shelter might have protected it from the elements until the flood dislodged it. The team returned to the canyon, this time with ground-penetrating radar to scan for hidden cavities. On day 6, they found it. A deep rock shelter, its entrance cloaked by a curtain of dried ocotillo. The air inside was dry, the floor a mix of sand and stone. In the corner, partially covered by silt, were human remains, 2 sets. One was male, the skull fractured, ribs broken. The other was female, her spine severed by a deep cut. Dental records later confirmed they were Soren and Lira. The scene told a brutal story. Soren had likely fallen, his injuries consistent with a 20-foot drop from the canyon rim. Lira's wound suggested a deliberate act, the knife's blade matching the cut in her vertebrae. Maris's heart sank, but the absence of the knife in the shelter pointed to someone else's presence. Torm's name burned in her mind. Back at the lab, Dr. Navarro found a new clue: a single strand of coarse, graying hair caught in the backpack's zipper, not matching Soren or Lira. It was sent for mitochondrial DNA analysis, a long shot given its degradation. Meanwhile, Maris interviewed a retired ranger who dealt with Torm in 2001. He recalled Torm's obsession with a big score in Vulture's Gulch, hinting at a hidden cache of artifacts. The pieces were falling into place. Soren and Lira, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, may have encountered Torm during his scavenging. A confrontation, a panicked act, and a storm that erased the evidence. Maris secured the warrant for Torm's trailer. The search was meticulous. Inside, they found maps of Vulture's Gulch, marked with cryptic symbols, and a small box of petroglyph fragments, illegal relics. But the damning evidence was a worn leather journal, its pages filled with Torm's scrawled notes. One entry, dated August 13, 2001, read, "They saw me. Had to act. Storm took care of the rest." The words were a confession, cold and stark. Maris's team tracked Torm to a bar outside Tucson. He sat alone, nursing a beer, his crescent moon scar glinting under the neon lights. When confronted, he didn't run. His shoulders slumped and he muttered, "The desert always wins." In custody, Torm's story unraveled. He'd been digging for artifacts when Soren and Lira appeared, their presence a threat to his operation. Panicked, he struck Lira with the knife, and Soren, trying to protect her, fell from the rim. Torm hid their bodies in the shelter, taking the knife and backpack. The storm scattered his tracks and he buried the knife in a wash, believing the desert would keep his secret. The scarf, dislodged years later, was his undoing. Amara was called to Phoenix. The confirmation of Soren and Lira's deaths broke her, but Torm's arrest offered a hollow justice. The desert had spoken, but its truth was merciless. If this story's gripping you, hit like and subscribe to uncover more secrets like these. Let's keep peeling back the layers of this tragedy. Gavrik Torm's confession was a raw wound, tearing open the mystery that had haunted Amara Kael for 7 years. In a sterile interrogation room in Tucson, his voice was low, almost swallowed by the hum of the overhead lights as he recounted the fatal encounter in Vulture's Gulch. He hadn't meant to kill, he claimed, just to scare Soren and Lira away from his stash of pilfered artifacts. But fear had a way of spiraling in the desert, where every shadow could be a threat. Lira's defiance, her sharp demand to know what he was doing, had pushed him over the edge. The knife was in his hand before he realized it, and Soren's desperate lunge to protect her sent him tumbling over the canyon rim. Torm's story was chilling, but it fit the evidence. The knife wound in Lira's spine, Soren's shattered bones, the backpack hidden in the rock shelter until the 2001 monsoon ripped it free. Maris Calder listened from behind the one-way glass, her jaw tight. Torm's journal entry. They saw me. Had to act. Storm took care of the rest. Was the nail in his coffin, but it didn't explain everything. Why had he kept the scarf? Why risk returning it after 7 years? Maris suspected guilt had gnawed at him, a slow poison that drove him to plant the clue, hoping for absolution or punishment. The Arizona desert, with its unrelenting heat and vast silence, had a way of breaking even the hardest souls. The case was now a homicide investigation, and the Tucson District Attorney's Office moved swiftly. Torm was charged with second-degree murder and tampering with evidence. His trial, set for early 2009, would hinge on the physical evidence, the backpack, the knife's bone dust, the journal, and his own words. But for Amara, justice was a distant echo. She drove to Saguaro National Park the day after Torm's arrest, standing at the trailhead where Soren and Lira's jeep had sat untouched. The desert stretched before her, its saguaros standing like sentinels, indifferent to her grief. She clutched a photo of Lira, her sister's smile frozen in that last text, and wept for the life they'd planned. Weddings, art shows, shared sunsets. The discovery of the remains brought closure, but no peace. The rock shelter in Vulture's Gulch was processed with forensic precision. Dr. Selene Navarro's team cataloged every detail: the silt-layered floor, the faint scratches on the rock where Torm had dragged the bodies, the absence of Lira's turquoise scarf in the initial hiding place. The scarf, Maris theorized, had been a keepsake, something Torm couldn't let go of until guilt compelled him to leave it for a hiker to find. The graying hair in the backpack's zipper, matched to Torm via mitochondrial DNA, sealed his connection to the scene. The desert had preserved just enough to betray him. Maris returned to the Ember Canyons one last time, not as a ranger, but as a witness to the place that had held Soren and Lira's final moments. The rock shelter was empty now, the remains respectfully removed, but it felt heavy with their presence. She found a small faded sketch from Lira's book, a pencil drawing of a saguaro under a crescent moon, tucked into a crevice likely missed by the forensic team. It was a fleeting glimpse of Lira's spirit, her love for the desert that had become her grave. Maris slipped it into her pocket, a silent promise to remember. The investigation uncovered more about Torm's world. His trailer revealed a network of contacts in the artifact trade, small-time dealers who'd bought petroglyph fragments and pottery shards. Vulture's Gulch, with its hidden petroglyphs, was his personal gold mine, one he'd protected with feral intensity. Soren and Lira had been unlucky, their hike crossing paths with a man who saw them as a threat to his livelihood. The storm had been his ally, washing away blood and tracks, leaving only fragments for the desert to hold. Amara began to rebuild, channeling her grief into a small art gallery in Tucson, dedicated to Lira's work. She framed the sketches from the backpack, their delicate lines a testament to her sister's vision. The gallery's opening drew a crowd, including Maris, who stood quietly in the back, her ranger hat in hand. For her, the case was a reminder of the desert's dual nature, beautiful and brutal, a place that gave and took without mercy. Torm's trial loomed, but the outcome felt secondary to the truth now laid bare. The silent hiker had spoken, and the desert had relinquished its secrets. If this story has you hooked, smash that like button and subscribe to dive into more mysteries like this one. Let's keep unraveling the truths hidden in the wild. The truth about Soren and Lira's fate was a jagged shard of glass, cutting through the haze of 7 years. Gavrik Torm's confession and the evidence from Vulture's Gulch had transformed the case into a stark narrative of desperation and betrayal. As the Tucson district attorney prepared for trial, the focus shifted from discovery to justice, but the desert's shadow lingered over everyone involved. Amara Kael, now 33, stood at the edge of her sister's gallery, her eyes tracing Lira's sketches on the walls. Each drawing was a whisper of the life stolen in that canyon, a life Amara was determined to honor. The gallery, named Lira's Light, was a sanctuary, its walls alive with her sister's vision of the Sonoran desert, saguaros glowing under starlight, ocotillo swaying in the wind. Amara had poured her savings into it, a way to keep Lira's spirit alive while grappling with the void of her loss. Maris Calder, meanwhile, was haunted by the case's echoes. She'd spent weeks revisiting Vulture's Gulch, not for evidence but for understanding. The rock shelter, now empty, felt like a grave, its silence louder than the storm that had hidden Torm's crime. She kept Lira's crescent moon sketch in her locker at the ranger station, a private reminder of the cost of her work. The trial, set for March 2009, was a formality in some ways. Torm's journal, the bloodied knife, the DNA-linked hair, and his own words formed an ironclad case. Yet his defense leaned on his claim of panic, not intent, arguing the desert's harshness had driven him to a momentary lapse. The prosecution countered with the deliberate act of hiding the bodies and backpack, painting Torm as a man who'd chosen greed over humanity. Amara attended every hearing, her face a mask of quiet resolve, her hands clutching a turquoise scarf fragment, the last piece of Lira she could hold. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the desert's wildness, its fluorescent lights and polished wood jarring against the memory of Vulture's Gulch. Torm's testimony was a slow unraveling. He described the moment of confrontation, Soren's shout, Lira's defiance, the knife flashing in his hand. He claimed he'd meant only to threaten, but fear took over. Soren's fall was an accident, he insisted, but Lira's wound was a panicked strike. He'd hidden them in the shelter, believing the storm would erase his sin. The scarf, he admitted, was his mistake, a keepsake he couldn't discard, left years later in a moment of guilt. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours. Torm was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years. For Amara, the verdict was a hollow victory. It didn't bring Lira back or erase the years of wondering. She left the courtroom and drove to the desert, standing at the trailhead where it all began. The saguaros stood silent, their arms raised like mourners. Maris, too, found no peace in the resolution. She retired from the ranger service months later, the weight of the case one of many that had carved lines into her face. She took a job training new rangers, teaching them to read the desert's signs, its beauty, its danger, its secrets. The case of Soren and Lira became a cautionary tale in her lessons, a reminder that the wild doesn't forgive mistakes, whether made by hikers or those who prey on them. Amara, standing at the trailhead, felt the desert's vastness press against her. The saguaros, silent witnesses to that August day in 2001, seemed to hold Lira's spirit in their shadows. She'd spent 7 years searching for answers, walking these trails alone, her nurse's precision turned to a ritual of hope. Now, with Gavrik Torm behind bars, the truth was hers, but it came at a cost. The gallery, Lira's Light, was her way forward, a place where Lira's sketches could live on, each one a defiance of the desert's cruelty. Amara hung the crescent moon sketch Maris had given her in the gallery's center, its delicate lines a beacon for visitors. Every weekend, she spoke to small crowds about Lira's art, her voice steady but soft, weaving stories of her sister's love for the Sonoran wilderness. It was her way of healing, of turning grief into something tangible. The community embraced the gallery, and soon, local artists added their work, creating a vibrant tribute to the desert's beauty and its dangers. Maris, in her new role training rangers, often visited, her weathered face softening as she listened to Amara's talks. She'd bring new recruits, using the case to teach them about the desert's dual nature, its allure, and its indifference. The turquoise scarf now framed behind glass was a relic of the case, displayed alongside a photo of Soren and Lira from that final text. It drew eyes, sparked whispers, and kept the story alive. For Maris, the scarf was a reminder of her own role, not just as a ranger, but as a keeper of the desert's truths. She'd never forget the scream she heard on that stormy ridge, or the shadow of the silent hiker who'd watched it all unfold. Gavrik Torm in his cell was a man eroded by his own choices. He wrote letters to Amara, begging forgiveness, but she never read them. They piled up, unopened, in a drawer at the gallery. His guilt had led him to plant the scarf, a reckless act that unraveled his secret. The desert, he'd said in court, always wins. But Amara disagreed. The desert hadn't won. It had simply waited, holding its secrets until the right moment. The monsoon that scattered the backpack, the creosote bush that caught the scarf, the ranger who never stopped listening to the wind. They were the desert's way of speaking, of delivering justice in its own time. The case of Soren and Lira became part of Saguaro National Park's lore, told around campfires and in ranger briefings. It was a story of love cut short, of a sister's relentless hope, and of a silent hiker whose guilt betrayed him. Amara found solace in small rituals, hiking the trails Soren and Lira loved, leaving small stones at the base of saguaros, whispering their names to the wind. She never remarried, but she built a life around the gallery, surrounded by people who saw Lira's light in her.